everything that I wanted to tell my kids was everything that sort of my mom and my grandmother and my grandparents and all of these sort of brilliant ancient minds sort of taught us that I just took for granted.
Searching for meaning.
Welcome to Search for Meaning. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest today is someone I've known for a long time, and I'm finally getting a chance to sit down and have her on the podcast, which I'm so grateful for. Mandana Dayani, you probably already know her, but over the course of our conversation, I think you'll get to know her a lot better, and you'll see why this is such an important moment, actually, for this conversation. So even though it took a while, I'm really glad that this is the moment that we get to be together. Mandana, obviously, as we're recording this, people will soon understand the context. We're recording this right in the middle of the war between Iran, United States, Israel. Your own experience as someone who was born in Iran and has Kurdish, Iranian, obviously Jewish background. Tell me a little bit about how you are navigating this moment.
It's just surreal. It's hard to sort of explain how hard it is to hold so many truths at one time. There's so much misinformation, there's so much polarization. I think when we fled Iran, I never thought I could go back home, right? It's really weird to be forced out of and then trying to figure out where you do belong, right? So I mean, I was always raised with this profound sense of patriotism because America saved our lives. That the Persian culture was my culture, but that homeland was not mine. And that anti-Semitism sort of engulfed the world again, that the only safe place for me would be Israel. And so it's weird because it's sort of all three of my identities in turmoil right now without any real sense of sort of what is going to happen. I don't think I ever contemplated that I could back to the park I grew up at, like I could take my daughters there and that we could go and visit my favorite places and see the beautiful mountains and all the things that sort of like were so important to me as a child. So the idea that that's even a possibility is just like overwhelming beyond words. And then, you think about as someone who's just does a lot in the political advocacy space, I don't think there is one single thing that will have a greater impact on the world than the removal of this regime. I mean, across the entire world, this is the highest impact could ever happen. This is the head of the snake. This is the way that we stop the conflict in the Middle East, terrorism spreading, the misinformation wars that are happening, all of the election interference. I mean, there's so much that comes from this and the destabilization that results from the obsessive, nihilistic nature of this terroristic regime. So, I mean, that feels surreal. The Shah, who I grew up revering because it was sort of the golden age where my parents could live freely. And, they talk. I mean, I grew up and I had like a frame picture of the Shah of Iran and his wife. And so to see his son possibly return as this transitional leader that we've needed for so long to just help restore Iran to its greatness that it always was. I mean, we talk about Iran forever, but yeah, it's I don't know, it's really surreal. I can't think of another word.
Well, I can only imagine all the layers of memory and
Mhm.
longing and hope, and then not just your own memories, but then the memories that you're inheriting from parents and grandparents' stories and photos and all those different things. So there's so much that you're carrying. How do you help someone understand? Because you do such a beautiful job online and with your Substack and in other places of really trying to communicate all of this. How do you explain that to someone who doesn't have the background and really bring it down to a level where anyone could get on board?
Prior to this regime, Iran was a leader in the world across so many sectors. I mean, the country was thriving across its economic prosperity, its contributions to art, literature, architecture, sciences. We produced some of the greatest doctors and scientists ever. Contributions going back as far back from Cyrus the Great to ideas of civil rights and human rights. Some of the greatest poets come from Iran. And so much of my personal inspiration, even in fashion and art, come from this territory. I mean, I think it's one of the greatest cuisines in the world. I think even Anthony Bourdain had talked so much about just sort of the richness and culture and the food and the spices. I mean, it's this magical place and magical people. And think about the since this regime has taken over in 1979, their singular obsession has been the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the United States. So when I was a kid in Iran, every single morning in school, I would have to chant death to America, death to Israel, death to America, death to Israel. That was the singular obsession and focus of this regime. And now you look at these women, I mean, it is a full gender apartheid. And so, I mean, what they've done against rights for animals, women, LGBTQ, economic freedoms, I mean, it's really just their own human rights violations internally are terrible. And then you think about the fact that they have funded all of the proxy wars in the so the Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah are all funded by the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. The Iranian people are amazing. They feel like they have been held hostage by this regime. They want nothing but the removal of this regime. And so when you take away the funding, Iran has billions of dollars a year that it spends on proxy wars and on misinformation and indoctrination of other people. So the amount of investment they put into terrorism, into training other people, to creating misinformation, to indoctrinating people on the internet, they are interfering with our elections. They're participating in what you're seeing on campuses now. There is so much that they're doing to meddle with us. They literally have people they pay to focus on creating intersectionality between the Iranian regime and what they call like the stupid like Westerners in the United States. So they literally have people that go on chat bots and I mean in chat groups constantly all day and talk about the sort of hey, let's build unity between the regime in Iran, this LGBTQ community or this Latinx community. And it's all lies, right? But they spread misinformation that they make look real. And that has created so much division in our country, which is what they want. There is just so much instability that I believe would go away if they were replaced by anyone that was sane.
Literally anyone. I mean, one of the things that's so extraordinary about a moment like this is all the different scenario possibilities and all of the things that could happen. And one of the things that can be paralyzing is to acknowledge that, well, it could be worse. You know, it is possible for something to be worse. But it seems to me, as a non expert who's taken great interest in this story for decades, I remember as a kid the hostage crisis in 1979. It's not like that's absent from my own personal experience. And then having spent so much time in Israel and knowing so many of the things that you just talked about as being deeply felt
Yeah.
by everyday Israelis. And by the way, my conversations when I've called friends over the last several weeks asking how are they doing, how are they
Yeah.
holding up, the support for this war is extremely high. And everyday Israelis across the political spectrum really feeling like this is the moment to try to affect real change there. But even going back to the idea of not knowing what the future, yes, things could always be worse, but the likelihood that you would get something worse than this regime seems small enough that it's worth the risk. And everything I've been told by people who actually grew up in Iran, people who still have family there and
Mhm.
spend time on the phone and, you know, connecting to people is it is an extraordinary people. There's such incredible human capital. And that's one of the saddest things about any tyrannical regime is that you see what it does to everyday human potential. I wanted to side note that's not along the depth of the geopolitical things we were talking about, but you did mention Persian cuisine, which I have come to really appreciate and love, having had the opportunity to spend many Shabbat meals and Rosh
Yes.
Hashanah Seders and other kinds of things with people. What are some of your own go-to dishes? What are things that you love to prepare? And for listeners, you know, maybe we can put some links in there so they can find their way to some of these recipes.
Persian Jews have something called gondi. There's I think there's a few different kinds of it. The one that we have, which is made with chickpea and ground chicken, is amazing. We usually have that on Shabbats. There's a stew called reimeh that's probably my favorite.
How do you pronounce it?
Reimeh. That's probably one of my favorites. It's amazing also.
What's in
So
that
many,
stew?
it's like tomato, it's like red and tomato base, and there's yellow lentils in it, and you can make it with beef or chicken. It's fantastic. I will send you.
What's chorish?
It means stew.
That's just a general.
So
Okay.
there's like koresh or sabzi. I'm sure you've had pheasant sabzi. There's a lot of them. They're amazing carafs. But yeah, I love those. I love all the different rices. Zeresh polo is one of my favorites. That's the one with like the mini currants. It's a little sour. It's amazing. I love saffron, so I cook a lot with saffron. I actually make my own saffron oil that I put on everything and I give to my friend. It's great. I mean, I love Persian. So to me, that is like it's always been the greatest expression of love because I think I was just raised by these like amazing, powerful women who, my grandma would always say like touch food, and that's how you express love. And so yeah, it's cool. My grandmother actually, when she moved to the U.S. and came to LA, she bought a house here, and so she was the grand matriarch, and we called her the Don. Every time someone adulted, they would buy a house near her because they wanted to be near her because she was the legend. So all of us sort of moved there. And I would say like one of the greatest things she left us, her legacy was this little village on the top of the hill because we all now live within walking distance of each other. We have Shabbat dinners every Friday and our kids run over to each other's houses. And it's just this magical sort of like life.
I was at your house when I delivered your daughter her Torah in the middle of COVID. Is that the same
Yes.
place?
Yeah.
So I was just talking about this morning because
That was
our sixth graders this year were the class who were kindergartners in 2020. And it was right about, this time of the year that everything closed down. And in May of 2020, we were going to invite all of our kindergartners in person to receive their little baby Torah scrolls. And it was actually a really beautiful moment, which we did on Zoom, the staff, because we were not with each other in person. And we figured out, well, if we divided the list up and everybody went, we could hand deliver every single Torah scroll to every family. And looking back on it, I mean, it's just so bizarre that we went through that,
It was, yeah, I remember that meant so much that you did that. It was also like that sort of peak insanity of COVID where I went on, I don't know what to do with my kids. So I went on Target and bought every bouncy house they had. And it created an entire like bouncy house gym in my like entryway. So when you came over, it was like, guys, close.
Don't come flying out the door.
Oh, let him see what we built inside our house.
The indoor bouncy house is great. We had, when my kids were little, we lived in Palo Alto, and we had a house with kind of an open plan, and it was a very high ceiling in one room. And I was at Target one day, and there was like a clearance sale on a bouncy house.
Yeah.
And I came home with it, and my wife was like, "What have you done?" I was like, "Check it out. We can set this up inside. If it's a rainy day, if the kids are going crazy, we can
amazing.
have indoor bouncy house," which we did, and it was awesome.
Yeah,
So-
and then we got more, and then we started connecting them. It was like crazy.
So I think it was about a year ago you reached out with your one mitzvah a day initiative. Was it about a year? Does that sound about right? Maybe.
Yeah, we launched January of last year.
It was just such a beautiful concept and beautiful to learn about. Tell everybody a little bit about the origin of that and where you came up with this idea, and maybe a story or two about things that people shared with you about some of the mitzvahs they were doing.
So after October 7th, I went to Israel, I would say 3 weeks after the attack. I'd done a lot of work in the misinformation space. And when I got to Israel, it was very clear that there was an entire other war front that was happening in the digital sphere. And I raised a fund and got a big group of people together. We spent a lot of time working on intervention. And after about 6 months, I really wanted to focus on building sort of this incubator, focusing on anti-Semitism. I had created I'm a Voter, which is a very big national nonpartisan civic engagement organization. And through that, I think learned so much about grassroots organizing and infrastructure. And so I think my and as someone who's just built brands my whole life, I think my idea was that I would take the approach I did in incubating other brands and incubating I'm a Voter, build sort of this incredible team, and we would pilot projects that we felt addressed very specific needs. And if and when they succeed and we have proof of concept, we would work on getting them sort of acquired by one of the larger organizations. So the first two we incubated were our Campus United and the OCU Chronicle, which were all focused on campus anti-Semitism. I traveled to all the schools. I met with all of the student leaders. They were the real founders of this, and we just built like a stellar team of world-class creatives that were working with them and us. And that ultimately got acquired by Stand With Us. And then One Mitzvah Day really came out of this idea. I had been talking with my friend Shannon Watts, who created Moms Demand Action, which is the largest grassroots organization in American history. And she kept saying, you need to build infrastructure, you need to build grassroots organizing. And I kept thinking about like what the right way to do that would be. And I was in DC actually, and my friend who's a congressman looked at me and he said, Mandana, listen, I can be as pro-Israel as you want me to be. But every time I say something, in support of Israel, I get, my team is fielding 1,000 phone calls of people calling us all sorts of crazy things. And to be honest, you guys rarely say thank you. And you rarely show up in like t-shirts, with our names on it, standing by us when we stand by you. And I was like, first of all, that's terrible. We should be better at this. But also, what a beautiful organizing principle to create a grassroots organization, right? Like, how beautiful to take one of the most important virtues of Judaism, which is gratitude and tikkun, all these things that have mattered so much to me, and build an organizing principle around it. And so I knew I wanted people on a text platform because it would be so much easier to convert them in other ways and to do in other actions. And honestly, one of the questions I get asked the most is like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. Like, how can I make a difference? Like, I hate how hard this feels. And so I was like, okay, we can give everyone one thing to do every day. And so One Mitzvah Day obviously was the idea was when people stand with us, we stand with them. We say thank you, we show our gratitude, we show up for them. And so it needs to feel like a win, right? Like when they show up and they defend us, it needs to be processed as a win. And as someone who's worked, on presidential campaigns, like people pay attention to how many phone calls they get when they do something, and they actually augment behavior based on what those numbers look like. That they don't have many other metrics to sort of define success. And so if Trader Joe's is getting, all this heat for selling Israeli feta and people are boycotting it, well, then they should get 5,000 emails that say, we're so happy, here's a picture of me with my Israeli feta. If members of, bipartisan committees do something to support anti-Semitism, it should feel like a win. They should be flooded with thank yous. Same thing with celebrities. If they're wearing a hostage pin, like when Paramount does something. And so, we just focused on creating something fun and joyful and cool and very easy. You click on, you get a text every morning, you click a button, populates a thank you for you. And I think we've sent, I want to say almost 6.5 emails already. I mean, messages of gratitude since we launched last year. So it's been wildly successful. And I think it has meant a lot to a lot of people. Like we hear people respond all the time, like, oh my God, thank you. This is so meaningful. Like, I'm always going to be with you. And last year, Jewish Federation of North America ultimately acquired One Mitzvah Day. So now it sits under their umbrella and they're amazing. And we have such an amazing board of people that every single week work with together to come up with these mitzvahs and approve them. It's great.
Do you have a favorite of all the mitzvahs that you put out there? Is one particularly close to you and really speaks to who you are?
It's a really good question. And I don't know the answer to that one.
Let me share, and then you can think while I'm sharing. But when I'm thinking, not from the work that you did in your nonprofit, but when I think about mitzvot in the Torah, one of the ones that always comes to mind that blows me away, that it's part of our tradition, is it says, if you are so poor that you're forced to pawn your jacket, you have to sell your coat to buy a meal for your kid or whatever it is. It says that the person who takes it in pawn has to return it to you at night, which doesn't seem to make sense. Like that's not how it works in pawn shops. Like it's theirs, then they can sell it. But if you can raise the funds, you can buy it back. But the idea is that you'd be so cold at night in the desert, that, you'd freeze, you'd be shivering. So they say, okay, you take the person's jacket and pawn, you give them the money, and then at night they come back and say, you know, I need my jacket back tonight, but I'll bring it back tomorrow morning. And you give it back each night, which I just adore because it really
Yeah.
doesn't seem to make sense. It's counter to the way economics would suggest it should actually work, but it says, there's what justice demands, and that is that people shouldn't be shivering in the middle of it.
That's amazing. That's really beautiful.
The other thing I read about, and you just referenced it, is Hakarat Hatov, the value of
Mhm.
acknowledging the good things in our lives and saying thank you. And I'd found that to be so needed these last couple of years, when things are dark in the world, whether it's, even going back a little bit further, to pandemic times, but particularly for the Jewish community, the last few years, there's been so much darkness. And then to take those moments and say, you know what? I'm still grateful for these things in my life. It's such an important thing to do. How do you keep track of it all? It seems like like today, did you start a new nonprofit or some new
No,
business enterprise that we
uh,
should know about?
no, no, no. I think the coolest moment in my life was when President Biden appointed me to the Holocaust Memorial Council Board of Trustees. It's a very long name, but it's a 5-year appointment, and it's been really amazing to work with this board. It's been amazing to sort of focus on some of the issues I care about a lot, which still includes misinformation, particularly around Holocaust now. And yeah, so I'm doing a lot of that. I still sit on those boards. I mean, but prior to that, I always worked. I was a lawyer and an agent, and I've worked in sort of the more corporate business side of things. So I'm sort of going back to that now, and continuing to do this. We'll see sort of where I'm voter lands on the what's it called, the election this year. But yeah,
Oh, that
that's
little
all.
thing, the election
Yeah,
issue.
there's elections trails.
When I was in Silicon Valley, there were folks in the congregation that would describe themselves, who would describe themselves as serial entrepreneurs. They were just always creating something new. And so you're definitely in that category. And I think about how exciting that is. There's this concept in Judaism that every day is newly created. It's like creation continues. And so
Mhm.
the world that we are experiencing today, it's like a brand new world. And what's so beautiful about that is it's this blank slate. What am I going to create today? And the other thing I love from the tradition is this idea that we're nivra b'tselem, we're created in God's image. And so one of the questions that the
Wow.
rabbis ask is, so it says that human beings are created in God's image. What does that mean? Like we don't look like God, right? God is um, beyond the kind of physical things that we would think about in terms of what it means to be created in God's image. And one of my favorite teachings says that no, what that means is we're created to be creators. That is the essential part of who we are. There's the godliness that is inside of us is
Oh, I
about
see. Yeah,
is
yeah.
about our own creativity. So that's the God in you, that's the God in me, is our ability to innovate, think new thoughts, imagine, well, what if this and this came together? And it can happen in so many different realms. I mean, you were talking about cuisine, and there's each of those recipes obviously is like there's stories upon stories upon
Totally.
stories that have been forgotten about how it ever got to that place. How do you do that with saffron and you put that in? And then
Yeah.
there's that story around that. And then there's the moment you think about, well, if we could just find a way to be more supportive of those politicians who are standing up for us, it could really make a difference. And so I'm going to come up with an initiative, but that didn't exist. And then all of a sudden it did exist. And then you just talked about, the United States Holocaust. And before we started recording, I mentioned that I had just been there a few months ago on a visit and how powerful it was. I'd been there once before, but to go again and see it. So at some point it didn't exist. And then someone said, we really need to memorialize this catastrophic event in a powerful way. And then we need to keep finding new ways of telling that story. So all of that really is about that creativity and how we channel it. Another new project for you is your Substack, all of it. And I've been getting it in my inbox and I get
Really?
notifications. Well, whenever someone I know, especially someone in our congregation is doing something, I'm like, hey, I gotta,
Oh,
check
that's
this out.
thank
It's a lot of when you do that regularly, you end up with a lot of great material coming at you. But tell me about all of it and how you came to that and what you're trying to accomplish there.
Funny question because okay, I would say the most honest answer is I've never had a linear sort of or career, right? I've had many pivots that don't make a lot of sense to people. They all make sense to me. And I feel like I try really hard to hold the center on a lot of issues. And I really believe in nuance. And I really refuse to sort of belong to binary thinking or polarized extremes in any way. And so, in some way, I always think it's funny because everything I say pisses off a bunch of people because, like, everyone on both sides is like constantly mad. And I always joke, like, I'm just like never the right kind of Persian or the right kind of Jew or the right kind of mom or friend, whatever, it's in this idea of, and as someone who helps people build brands, I'm always telling people like it's so important to have your niche and find it and sort of own it and lean into it really, really hard. And I sort of had this moment where I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be any one of these things. Actually think like all of these parts of me are really important. And yes, I'm an advocate and I love politics and I really love fashion and I've worked in it for so long and I love brands and I love to travel and I love food. And I was like, I don't want to pick a lane. I'm like, this is who I am. This is all of it. Take it, leave it. I actually don't care. And it's been kind of therapeutic, I think, also, just because it doesn't also invite the immediate toxicity that social platforms do. So when I create something and I put it out one of those platforms, it's just like I don't read anything. I don't even check my DMs anymore, but the rage that or I can see on my team's face. And so this feels like just a letter and there's something that's been really nice about it. So I don't know. I mean, it's grown a lot and it's been really fun to build, but it's cool. We also, I mean, when I built our Campus United, we created a newsletter there also, which was really cool. We kept hearing from students that they were being told that they can't talk about Zionist values on campuses, that they wanted to publish stories of their experiences or talk about Israel, what was happening in the Middle East. And a lot of the schools were telling them they weren't allowed to, and they were either being pushed out of their publications in school newspapers or they were being fully silenced. And I just had, I had another one of those moments of like, okay, this is dumb because we've built so many media properties and we don't need to ask for their permission anymore. So let's just launch a student newspaper. Like, why? And it would be digital, it would be cooler. And then I hired two of my friends who are amazing editors at huge like fashion and editorial magazines, and they sat with all of these amazing students, and Yasmin really led the charge, who I know and yeah, we created the OCU Chronicle and we launched with I think 70 students published their stories, and we were like, okay, cool, and now you guys can publish whenever you want, whatever you want. Like, this is, I don't know, I think there's so many times where people try to push us out of systems and structures. And when we respond and build something on our own, it always ends up being better. And so sometimes I don't know, I almost find that we create the solutions that we need out of necessity.
Yeah, it was a recent talk that Brett Stevens gave at the 92nd Street Y, the
Hmm.
State of World Jewry, which you might have seen. And he talked about when there's not a seat at the table, then build a table. And was thinking of that as you were describing, the student newspaper. And it's been the case in so many different venues for Jews. When there wasn't a place for Jewish doctors to practice medicine, they said, we will create Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los
Hmm.
Angeles, and we'll create Mount Sinai. And then eventually they merged and Cedars Sinai came into being. And when country clubs wouldn't allow Jews in, again, here in LA, places like the Riviera Club and Los Angeles Country Club, they said, okay, we'll make Hillcrest and El Cab, and those will be the places where Jews come. And there are whole industries, including, don't tell the anti-Semites, but including Hollywood, where Jews said, okay, we will create those
100%.
things. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And instead of striving to get a seat at the table, build the table. You said something about pivoting, which I wrote down. I loved. You said, I've made all these mini pivots. They don't make sense to others, but they all make sense to me. What when you think about how all those pivots make sense to you, is there a through line that you would describe?
I think I'm really good at telling stories. I understand consumer behavior and behavioral science, and I'm good at sort of taking ordinary things and making them sort of more extraordinary. And so all of those sort of become the ways that I build brands. And so whether I've done that in the consumer sector or whether I've done that for a politician or whether I've done that around an impact idea or concept. I mean, if you look at I'm a voter, it's not, it is very clear the skills that I sort of brought over were very right. Like we launched during Fashion Week in New York City and we had over 200 collaborations with huge brands. And so that was sort of my lens. There's a lot of things I don't know how to do, but I can bring sort of what I know how to do into these spaces and sort of be able to have a lot of impact. And so whether, yes, I'm doing those, I guess being a lawyer probably made no sense, but I didn't really have a choice because I'm an immigrant and I didn't want to be a doctor. And I don't think I knew other jobs existed. But everything since then was sort of me reflecting on what I was really interested in and sort of applying my skills to those genres. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm always just like chasing. I'm so curious and I always want to learn. And so sort of pivoting through industries that I'm curious or interested in about and applying what I know how to do.
As you were describing those pivots and sort of the through line, I was thinking of something I once learned from Dr. Lee Schulman, a blessed memory, who became a dear friend. I got to study Talmud with him for many years. He was ran the School of Education at Stanford, and he said this when I received my master's in Jewish education. He came and addressed the graduating class, and he talked about the focus was education, and he talked about that adage that you learn by doing. And he
Mhm.
said you don't really learn by doing; you learn by reflecting on what you've done. The doing itself isn't the real learning. It's later when you think about it, you're like, okay, and I could have done this differently and I could have done that differently. And here's a way I could have refined that, or here's a way I could have had maybe a slightly different response. And then you try it again and you iterate and all those different kinds of things. So I'm thinking about those pivots, and it's doing something and reflecting and learning and then saying, oh, now I'm going to take everything I learned
Yeah.
in fashion, I'm going to now apply to this thing. And then the world keeps changing. So when you go back 10 years ago in your career, it was a different world. And there were
Yeah.
things you weren't, I was like, I'm not going to put all of my energy into answering those who are delegitimizing Israel all the time because it wasn't happening in the way it's happening now. It wasn't completely absent, of course, but it's not like the shouting that we're hearing right now. And it's like, ooh, there's an urgency, so I have to respond. So I was thinking of that when you talked about all those pivots.
I think part of my trauma response is always been doing. So like movement, I'm really terrible at being still. I really don't know how to stop. So yes, I think doing is how I process pain and just acting and not think, not sort of being upset, but using channeling all of that into some form of action and response. Like even now, I'm working on building something new and I can almost look back on everything that I did and realize like, oh, this is the tool that the universe, God, whatever it is that you believe in, gave me from this experience to put in my tool chest for this moment. Like, and I can see it. Like, there were so many things in my life that sort of even felt random to me. And now I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly why I was supposed to do that. I know exactly why that like journey happened for me. And I know exactly what I got from it. And I know like how to use it now. And I really believe that. And I really believe that there's always a plan and these things happen for a reason. And I say this to people all the time who are like, how am I qualified to be an advocate or show up as an activist on something. And I'm like, you don't even know how many things you've learned in your life from just being present through different experiences. Like, if you've planned a bat mitzvah for your kid, like, you can figure out a whole lot of other things. Like, there's so many things you've learned that you don't even know are organizing and that you're already doing these things. You're just doing them in different venues. And you have to just apply everything that you've learned from those moments of your life to this one. That's cool.
That's the reflection piece, and
Mhm.
it is so powerful. I think one of the challenges, especially if you're the kind of person who's always moving and doing and creating and going to the next thing, is how do you find those moments for reflection? You obviously do it, but you're probably doing it while you're doing something else, and rushing to the next thing, and then it kind of clicks. And I've found that it is really hard to carve that time out and say, okay, I really want to try to unpack this experience and think about what it is that I'm feeling, what it is I'm going through. One of the things that I'm grateful for experientially in my life is right at the beginning of COVID, I already applied to be a fellow in a clergy program that trained clergy and Jewish clergy in meditation and mindful practices through the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And I had applied for this in like 2019. And our first retreat was in January of 2020. We were just starting to hear a little bit of rumbling about this virus but none of us had any idea what was going to unfold. So we went to this in-person retreat and then we started meeting regularly online afterwards. And then March of 2020, everything shuts down. And all of a sudden, in the middle of all of the uncertainty and fear and really trauma that we were all going through, being separated from people we care about and, school and all the different things that people were going through, I had this opportunity to sit and try to meditate and do mindful practices every day, which were new to me.
That's
And so
cool.
it was really cool. And it was such a gift actually,
Yeah.
because I talked to some friends who had done the program in previous cohorts. And they said, "Oh, what a bummer that it happened during COVID and you missed out on some of these other experiences." And I was like, actually, I didn't think of it that way. I thought, what a gift
Yeah.
that in the middle of this moment, I can sit on my couch and I would get up early in the morning and that was part of my practice was I'd sit in, 5 or 10 minutes of just quiet. And it was really wonderful. And I don't do it as regularly as I once did, but I still do. And it really is amazing. One of my favorite quotes, I think I found it on your website or in an article you wrote. Meaning is something we make, not something we find. And our motto at the temple, I guess it's kind of our mission statement is we make meaning and change the world. And I remember when we were coming up with that, someone said something about what is it, what does this make meaning? And it kind of came back to this quote from Dr. Lee Shulman that I just shared that, so much of life, again, is not just about experiencing something, but it's about how do you unpack that experience and
Yeah.
try to make sense of it and make meaning of it. Hopefully, you can do it in a way that can propel you forward to the next thing in a way that will be positive and bring more joy into the world, bring more kindness into the world, bring more goodness into the world. That would be my hope for people as they're trying to make meaning of it all. But say something about you right now. What are you doing that is giving you a deep sense of meaning and helping you to make meaning as opposed to just find it?
I think one of like the greatest blessings in my life is that I've always made space to do that. So it's there's never sort of like a period that I reflect on or since I was very young child where making impact wasn't a big part of my life. So it's just like of me or all of me at all times. It really depends, and a lot of the times, sort of how I show up in the world is a reflection back on the issues that are really impacting me or that impacting people I love or just feel like some profound injustice that I just can't process. I don't know. I think it's really it's funny. I don't know. I would feel very incomplete if I didn't have that piece all the time. And it's sort of like the part that I get to share with my kids. Oh, they travel with me, they come to all the things, like they're the sort of advocacy side of my life is so intertwined with my kids and my husband and sort of how we have fun. And so, yeah, it's really like a part of me.
Mm.
It's weird. It's not like a thing I do or like a hobby or like a designated time period.
Sort of an essential self, and when your essential self connects to things that you can do in the world that can make the world a better place, but also can be a way that you support yourself and make a living and all these other things. Boy, talk about hakarat hatov. Think
Mhm.
about all the people who long for that, where something that, and I feel that way in my own life. I feel so lucky that so much of what I do that gives me joy professionally and that I really feel lucky doing, including conversations like this and working with Bar Mitzvah students and being there for people when they've suffered a loss or when they want a prayer of healing or thinking of a program, like how do we respond to this? I enjoy that.
Mhm.
And then it gets to be something that I feel like if I do it well, it can make a difference in the world. And they pay me for it. On top of all that, it's part of what I get to do to, make a living. So I want to thank you so much for your time. Just one last question. And it's very premature to do this because God willing, you'll be granted many, 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 many more chapters and many, many, many more years. But at this moment in your life, as you reflect back on experiences of the immigrant experience that you and your family have had, the different career pivots that you've taken along the way that all added up to something that actually has a coherent whole. I'm wondering, what would you say it all adds up to for you, right? And I guess this is, related to some of the questions about media and things like that. But when you try to pull it all together, like all of it, what does it all add up to?
I had this conversation with someone who I was working with, and she said, um, "There's a lot of people who say a lot of things, and very few people that have something to say. And you've shown up on so many things, and held the line, what all these very nice things. What do you want to say? What's your message?" That like floored me because I thought so hard about I don't know what I want, sort of my like singular message. I'm working through that. But what was interesting was she sort of had me do this exercise and she said, it sounds really morbid, but you're dying. You have 5 minutes. What do you want to tell your kids? And I've never thought about that question before. I don't if you have. And it wasn't any, like I sit on the Forbes and Fortune panels and I do all these fancy things and I talk about advocacy and leadership and building and scaling companies and marketing, all these things that I talk about. And I was like, none of those things, right? It was everything, all the values that are why I am who I am and why I've succeeded and why I feel like loved and whole are all the values that like go back to sort of my dad and his father, who was a rabbi, and they lived in this little village in Sanandaj where everyone took care of each other. And my grandmother, who cooked for 50 people a day. And, this sort of like village life of taking care of each other, of, I always call the wisdom of gathering, but like being together, of hosting Shabbat dinners, of building community, of this like open door, always include people, bring them in, just like everything that I wanted to tell my kids was everything that sort of my mom and my grandmother and my grandparents and all of these sort of brilliant ancient minds sort of taught us that I just took for granted and I thought was like as dumb as like eat turmeric. But I was like, okay, but it was just so this ancient wisdom. I mean, obviously all of the principles of Judaism, like I don't think until really, I know it sounds so weird, but until that moment where I just had to be like, what do I want my kids to know? And it was like, you're never, I remember my parents always said, like, you're never allowed to miss Shabbat. I don't care what happens. I don't care if you have a school dance, and I was like, this is really excessive, but it was true. Like it was the commitment to be together and to gather. I don't think I understood how sacred it was and how much it shaped like every single part of me. So I think that's the most important thing I learned. And it wasn't through any of my pivots.
I love that so much. And we're recording this in the second parasha of the book of Leviticus, Parashat Tzav. But 2 weeks ago, we closed the book of Exodus with Parashat Vayakel Pekudei. And Vayakel is the commandment to gather. God says to Moses, gather the Israelites together. But the Hebrew root, kihilah, in modern Hebrew means community. And so Vayakel is the active command form, gather. And so I was thinking of that verse when you said that wisdom. And when you think about, I think it's actually really healthy to think about, well, what would they say about me? What would be on my tombstone? What will be in my eulogy? What will my grandchildren, God willing, someday, what will my grandchildren or great grandchildren say about me? And think about the wisdom and the beauty and like she gathered us. You mentioned your grandmother and the way she brought you all together
Mhm.
physically and then fed you and kept you close. So I think that human need to be together and to convene and to be convened is so powerful. Mandana, thank you so
Oh my
much
God,
for your
thank you.
time. And I hope you will go from strength to strength in the work that you do, in all of the pivots. It'll be really fun and exciting, not just for me, but I'm sure for so many people who are inspired by your work to see how those pivots keep happening and how altogether it tells a story of gathering and convening and meaning.
Thank you. And hopefully we'll do the next one in Tehran.
Well, that's our episode. Thanks for listening to Search for Meaning. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps others discover the podcast. And consider sharing Search for Meaning with a friend. They might appreciate the insights and inspiration found here. Special thanks to Josh Sterling, our editor, Amy Shelby, our producer, Raz Husseini, our production coordinator, and Mara Friedman, our social media manager. Our theme song was composed by David Cates and myself and features a vocal by cantor Josh Goldberg. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay tuned.